just to introduce myself, I'm Karen Buck. I'm the Member of Parliament for this area, Westminster North. We're here with, obviously, Ken Livingstone talking about the housing policy, looking forward to the 2012 election, and with Andy Slaughter, the MP for Hammersmith. And why we decided to come here, we couldn't get the Independent Parliamentary Standards Authority accommodation, which would be much more pleasant and spacious, but we decided to come here because the Paddington Law Centre, who I have worked with for a great many years, and Ken reminds me that he first voted here more years ago than I'm going to mention. But the Paddington Law Centre have been at the forefront of providing advice to people in housing need, and dealing both with the pressures of housing need, which we all know are catastrophic in London, the housing waiting lists, the homelessness, and the level of overcrowding. And also with benefit changes that have been leading people into debt and into arrears and in itself indeed fueling homelessness. And particularly at the moment, as I think all of you will know, there are proposals contained in the budget 2 weeks ago which are for the deepest cuts in housing benefit since its inception, which particularly impact on areas like Westminster and Hammersmith, but in fact also have a very, very serious impact on low-income households who are renting, at the moment particularly privately renting, all over London, the worst affected region, but also all over the country. So we've already started having a conversation with the local advisory agencies about how this is going to impact. And obviously they can speak for themselves about the work they're doing and the impact that they think that further pressure on housing and housing benefit is going to have. But we have Lee Roy-Pitter and Nicole and Luciana here from the Law Centre, and two work experience students here as well. So that's by way of preamble. That's why we're here. That is why we are even more concerned than we have been for years. Because of this additional crisis in housing benefit, adding to what is already a very serious problem with housing delivery in London in the last 2 years. We're still working through the starts in housing, social house building, which were commissioned by Ken before the 2008 election, but we are looking at that falling off a cliff as funding from the Housing Communities Agency and the capital spend on housing dries up. And we are very much, and I'll finish on this point, very much sadly of the view that the pressure on housing benefit and on housing delivery is very much of a piece with the kind of thinking about social housing and tenants that Hammersmith Council and Westminster Council have articulated and put into practice so much over the previous years. So that's all I want to say. I think everybody will want to say something or answer questions, but I'm going to pass over first of all to Ken to talk about his housing policy and expectations looking forward to the 2012 election. Ken.
Thanks so much, Karen. I'm delighted to be here with Karen and Andy. And particularly here in this centre, because coming up half a century, I expect nearly, this centre's been fighting to defend people on a whole range of issues, but time and again on housing. 50 years ago, a landlord in this country became a household name, Peter Rackman, and he operated in this area. And he was able to operate and drive people out their homes and extort money and intimidate, because the then Tory government removed the constraints on what a landlord can charge under the Housing Acts. And it led to a wave of evictions, and it totally ended the career of the housing minister of the day, a man called Henry Brooke, who was the MP for Hampstead, who suddenly found many of his respectable Conservative voting private tenants who turned up at his surgery to complain they couldn't afford the new rents. And he coined a phrase that entered the national political dialogue. He said, "You can't afford to live here anymore." And it cost him his seat in Parliament. And this is what we're about to face. A sort of cleansing of these more expensive parts of London of anybody who can't afford to live there anymore. And this time it isn't going to be crooked landlords using thugs. It's going to be local councils acting under the government's new cap system. So we're going to see what is already a city with a housing crisis. I mean, if you actually look at the polling, housing is up there with crime as Londoners' main concern, and it's about to get worse. It gets worse because a lot of people are going to be thrown out of their accommodation, and many of the people who are going to lose their homes are people with families, so they'll end up in homeless family accommodation somewhere else in London at much greater expense. But at the same time, of course, Boris Johnson has presided over a catastrophic decline in new housing construction. When I was elected, we were building about 16,000 homes a year in London in the year 2000. We got that up to over 30,000. We had the great struggle with developers to say 50% must be affordable, a struggle to make sure housing was being built for rent. But that has all gone back. I mean, Boris has done away with the 50% rule. The commitment he gave to build 50,000 affordable homes over 3 years, which I managed to persuade Gordon Brown to give the Mayor's office £5 billion to spend in the 3 years that end next March 2011. Nowhere close to that target being achieved. So we're going to be in a situation where the amount of housing being built of all kinds is declining, and more people are being thrown out of their existing accommodation. And we're going to have the sort of housing crisis that we saw in the 1960s. It is going to become a major and defining political issue between the parties. That's why I've asked Karen to prepare a housing policy that can bring together as many strands of opinion with the biggest consensus behind it to go into the election in 2012, but to lay the foundation in that policy for a change nationally. So this long neglect of the last 30 years as governments, and we haven't really been pushing the councils to build, and that's Mrs Thatcher, of course, largely stopped them. We've got to decide how much housing we need, who's to build it, how's it to be funded. And we have one immediate advantage in London. I mean, the various public bodies, the Mayor's office, the LDA, own a vast amount of land. And you could go to the bond markets and raise money on the bond markets. You don't need a penny from government. And because the bond markets will lend, because you have a physical asset, a home, against your borrowing, you have the income stream of rent. It's exactly the same as when Gordon Brown gave me the power to borrow £2.9 billion on the bond markets to transform transport. We built the East London line. We were oversubscribed. The money markets wanted to lend. They would always want to lend where you're building a physical asset that has real worth. And the long-term rise in housing prices here, this is no doubt in my mind, we don't need the government to give us a grant. It would be very nice if they did. I recognise they're a bit hard up at the moment, but these are the sort of assets that private funding will be happy to get involved in and stand behind. And that is what I will seek to put at the heart of our policy, building homes for Londoners to live in. Making sure that those homes are, as far as possible, family homes, so that we can accommodate a whole range of people in this city. Far too much of what's been built in the last 10 years is 1- and 2-person units, and that doesn't take account of that. But also to actually say that I'll be working with MPs like Andy and Karen to highlight what's coming, and to shame this government into changing that policy, because there will be Lib Dem MPs in places like Wood Green and Brent Central and Hornsey and Bermondsey who see their own constituents thrown out of their housing because of this cap on benefits. We intend to shame them into changing the policy. And I'm delighted to launch the housing strategy. It is the beginning, as I say. What Karen will pull together, ready for the election in 2012, will no doubt be different in many ways for this, but the basic principles is the underlying one. The way we solve our housing problem is to build more homes, homes for rent, homes for families. And if we can do that, the quality of life in this city is dramatically improved. Thank you very much.